We are a charitable CBS. We are into our 5th year of being a charitable CBS. We do have some achievements to our names. We have refurbished 4 flats in the town centre that we rent at affordable rent, that we call living rents, and we have done a share offer to make that happen, and we also combine that with a loan stock offer. So we have what we call our investors collective that have lent us money in order to make that project work, and others as well. But we also do quite a lot of what we call community organising activity. Probably the pinnacle of that was doing what the organisation workshop event in the Observer building as the first event when that was first purchased by White Rock Neighbourhood Ventures, which was a month's worth of gathering 50 people together who either experienced long-term unemployment or were quite young and not had any employment, giving them something to organise, which was 3 things: to build some partitions for meanwhile office use in the Observer building, to provide themselves with breakfast and lunch every day during the workshop, and also to document it and to produce a newsletter, which ended up as an 8-page insert in our local newspaper, the Hastings Independent. You gather them all together on that first day. I do remember this, and you say to the people, here are all the tools. You have also people here who have expertise, and you have all the materials, but what you don't have is organisation. And off you go. And it was quite a roller coaster of a month. So I'm happy to talk about a little bit more about that if people are interested in that. And we are now, one of our strands of work, we are one of 2 organisations, community organisations, that are leading a Heritage Action Zone, which is part of the Historic England funding stream for rejuvenating high streets. So we were successful in getting a £2 million bid for 4 years, and we had to find £2 million match alongside that, which we've managed to do in the first year, which is great. So all of these kind of things I think might be useful to reference if they come up in the discussion, because they're just illustrations of what can be achieved and that we have achieved in Hastings. Some of them may not be relevant to your area, some of them may be fascinating to you, and you want to know more, and there's not enough time today to tell you about them all in detail. But what I was kind of hoping to do in this discussion, and keep it relatively low tech, something I kind of learned from sort of painful job interviews, is the less kind of IT you rely on, the better. And to ask you some of the questions and maybe have a bit of a debate and have a bit of a chat about what else is also possible around housing. So I'm going to kick that off with a sort of manifesto statement. So I'm just going to read something and see whether you kind of agree with this. So this is something that we wrote in one of our kind of publication we published a few years back. So we know that loneliness is a killer. We know that self-efficacy, the sense of agency, the perceived ability to make a difference or achieve an outcome has a direct impact on the successful performance of life and citizenship. Even before COVID, we knew that the world of work was going to change dramatically. But we can also assume that organisation and resource-enhancing skills will always be in demand. We know that the answer to climate change will be in cultural and behavioural changes to the way we live. And we know that in future, individuals, families and communities will have to do more for themselves and each other in order to tackle what we call the wicked problems that society faces. So things like an ageing population and the challenge of affording care. So I'm going to ask the question really, is that relevant to community-led housing? And I'm just going to pop a little thing into the chat and a statement to see whether this prompts anything for you all. Did that work? Let me just try again. So I've just popped something there into the chat, which is just a statement. I'll read it out. So and see whether people are kind of, so a housing solution that does not address the way we live issues may deliver thousands of residential boxes, but will make little impact on the welfare of the people now or in the future. Instead, we need to recognise people as producers as well as consumers of their own homes and neighbourhoods, just as they are, or could be, producer consumers, agents of their own lives. So if you want to just use you could use your reactions button, or you could type in the chat. So whatever's brought you to this conference today, whatever your motivation is it more complicated than just about building houses? Is there something else motivating you behind that? So there's just a question you might want to take a few seconds to think about. But just a simple yes or no. Is it just about building houses, or is there something else actually that you're really trying to connected to that? It was partly, I was hoping, because as you said, and that sort of thing, it may be very different from the situation in Hastings. It might be about rural needs in Hampshire, or parts of Hampshire. Okay. So if I were going to try and hone that question down a little bit. So if you had to choose one thing that it was about other than housing, what would be that one thing? And I don't mind if you're repeating some of what you've said already. You know, I've noticed people have said it's about the environment, or quality of life. Heartening to see, really, in terms of, because I think this is something kind of intrinsic to the community-led housing movement, if I call it a movement, that what's motivating us isn't just about the fact that we have a broken housing market and what may be particularly local issues around the lack of affordable homes. It's also about this wider vision, really, of about how we want to live. And I just want to ask that question, really, or hopefully you have a discussion, really, about what else is it that community land trusts could be getting involved in that helps them achieve what they want to achieve, and it helps them achieve more than just building boxes, because I don't think any of us really are about building boxes. But just to be sure, is there anyone out there that dissents and says, actually, all of this is a distraction, we just need to get on with the homes? Is there anyone who thinks that? It should just, this is a distraction. We're set up to build homes, we should be just building homes. There you go. So you got the shops in there. Angela's comment is just that's what the house builders are, just doing that, just building the homes. Yes. So one thing I didn't mention in the intro was that we've also had a big disappointment here in Hastings. There was a piece of land in an area of Hastings that we talk about as the Ore Valley, and it lies between two neighbourhoods that are amongst, when you look at those types of statistics around deprivations, two of the most deprived neighbourhoods outside of, in the southeast, outside of London. But they're not especially bad places to live. The housing quality is reasonable. It's not poor housing. The environment is quite nice. There isn't a high level of crime. It's educational attainment and worklessness that are the issues for those neighbourhoods. But sitting between them was what was an old power station site that's become derelict and contaminated. And it was part of the original Millennium Communities. I don't know if anybody else remembers that initiative back in, obviously, around the turn of the century, to be a regeneration program. And it kind of foundered, really, especially post 2008. And this site was left derelict for quite some time. We eventually came up with a proposal that we think was workable if we'd had access to the Community Housing Fund, to build 80 homes on that site, and it blended quite a lot of different ideas into it. So it made us think about, well, who do we want to live here in terms of mixed community? So 50% of the houses were for ownership and the other 50 were for rent. But amongst those rent ones, we used our living rents model, which is something that's tied to the local wages rate in Hastings, and just rises with inflation, not with the market. But we also put in some local housing allowance and social housing rents in there as well. So about half and half between the living rents and the social rents. Subsidized purchases on the houses, and it was about 10% of the thing would have been full sale, but it would have been leasehold. The community land trust would have been the long-term ownership. So that's always been an important principle for us at Heart of Hastings. So in the introduction, Beverly talked about the buildings that we're working on in the town centre. The long-term vision is for the land trust to always hold those assets and be in control of what it costs to live in those premises. And but the scheme in Ore Valley as well was a modern means of construction. So it was about thinking about the materials that are used to build the houses. It was thinking about low energy use and keeping the bills down, the use of water, the use of the land around the houses. It was about including spaces where people could be supported in their living if they live in care. And it was also about doing a large-scale organisation workshop, which would have been an opportunity for people to learn the modern means of construction and to get a contract as being part of the workforce building out the rest of the scheme, because the site just so happened to be next to Hastings College's construction campus. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that the owners of that site, the regeneration company that had held it for and not been able to develop it for 20 years, said, nah, this is all a bit too never for us. We're going to just go with the traditional house builders. I will suspect that land will still be undeveloped in 10 years' time because the contamination in there needs so much subsidy. I don't know where those private developers will get that subsidy from. It's not impossible. There may come a grant that comes to do that, but when they come to build, they will just build the usual standard housing that we've seen, with its nod of 25% towards affordability. But there won't be anything innovative about the environmental impact of those homes or the use of the area around that. So while we were developing those plans, we had a group of people that occupied that site and we had a license to occupy it, that we called our bottom-up development team, our BUD team, who met every week for 2 weeks for 3 years. They did various projects on that site for around activities for young people, growing stuff, because it's contaminated land. That was quite a challenge. But doing environment walk tours, because it's quite a unique ecosystem in that valley. So we were doing all sorts of other things as well on that side of things. So these are just examples that I'm giving you on that side of things. So I'd quite like to hear from people now, really. I know you've been furiously tapping away there and I can't keep track of it really in terms of all of the chat in there. But does anybody want to talk about eco impact? Does anyone else have that kind of vision? In our scheme, we worked with the architects of the Bedstead scheme, originally in South London. I don't know if people are familiar with that one, but essentially what we hoped to do was, the first thing that we would have built would have been a warehouse that would have later become the community hall for the site. But that warehouse to begin with was where the actual assembly would take place. So yes, you are getting materials delivered, but the assembling was happening on site. And there are so many different types of modern means of construction, and it's about the design that you wish to have. But and what we don't have in Hastings in our construction campus is we don't have any modern means of construction syllabus at all. So it's all traditional bricks and mortars and the kind of arc tools, as they refer to it, arc trades as they refer to them. We thought that was, so employment was a very important part for us, really. And the organisation workshop that would have triggered that off, as well as being the training mechanism, working with the contractors to train people, was also an opportunity. So for people, so broadening out what we actually did in the Observer building was for people to be able to participate in this, that they would need childcare, they would need feeding, they would need other possibilities of kind of developing business ideas. So ultimately, when you've built your site, you want to be able to do the grounds maintenance, and there was also a nature reserve next to the site as well, which had been, well, it was cut off because this site was excludes people walking through it, and then it butts up against the railway line. So the nature reserve, this kind of jewel in the of the valley, was kind of inaccessible to anybody that lived there because it was sandwiched in by other owners. But people, and also, you know, could you have a cafe there? What were the other sort of things that would bring people to think about kind of ideas of locking money into their own community? So out of our organisation workshop, which was a smaller scale one that we did in the Observer building, there was one successful business that came out of that. So it was someone who was inspired by that and started to make his own wooden furniture and various other kind of bits. He worked from we found him he found himself actually it was a cave, and we're lucky enough to have caves in Hastings. And that was his workshop, and that was in an alleyway that has been a ASB kind of centre where people would go out of the way to either drink or use various drugs, and they built a pocket park there, and it's now reclaimed without the ASB. So it doesn't come without some contention about the various people that get to use it. So you get students coming from the college who some people criticise for the rubbish that they leave, or the music that they play, to people having their lunches there from the back of Rock House in the nice summer months at least. And in fact, we did manage to have a barbecue down there during the COVID relief time. But it's all, I'm trying to paint a picture here of how you follow different avenues and allow people to help, you're empowering people to shape their futures as well. Quite an amazing place to kind of, our office is based in Rock House, so it's an amazing place to kind of work when it's not restricted as it is at the moment, because you're constantly bumping into people who are doing small businesses that we use, so in terms of graphic designers to architects, all sorts of people really. So Rock House also has a hot desk centre, which is it's only got a couple of people working from it at the moment, but it usually has around about 15-20 people in there who are just starting kind of their own kind of startups usually, and there's usually some sort of filmmakers we have connection with. So it's a 9-floor building, and it was kind of renovated step by step, floor by floor, as we kind of got the money to do it. The 5th and the 6th floor are 6 residential flats. So there is a housing element built into that. And I think that's quite important really in terms of having a mixed use building. It's making the most of that building, but rather than having it all as offices, the fact that it's someone else's home as well means that they have a kind of community around them already. So where that works, sort of simple illustration of that was one of them. The lift went out of action for quite some time, and everyone just kind of chipped in and said, "Look, we can go and do your." And someone was particularly dependent on that lift in terms of their immobility, We can help you with your shopping and all of that sort of stuff. And there was also a back in the early days a terrible leak and flooding on the lower levels, but which affects the way that people access into the building, not anyone's home or work premises then. But everyone just chipped in to clean it all up. It was horrible because all the sewage came up and all of that side of things. But then you just got this kind of collective feeling of like, okay, these things happen, but we can put it right, really. But it's important to note, as I said, so we use the living rents model for the rents there, and they are pegged, and people probably have their own ideas about how to peg rents and such things, but we peg it to the median wage in Hastings, which is quite low for the southeast, with the principle that really people should only be paying a third of their income on rent, and that then only rises with inflation. And what that has meant for a tenant in Rock House, so someone, I think the first tenancy there was in 2016. So in those intermittent 6 years, their property is now 85% of market value. And if the trends continue, because the housing market is changing dramatically in Hastings now, in 3 years' time, it will be below 80%. So it will be affordable by any definition. So it was a bespoke affordability. Many a debate with the local authority as to whether it was truly affordable, but it's about affordable in perpetuity. So as I say, in 3 years' time, it will be below 80%. In 15 years' time, who knows? It could be as low as 50. And I think my point I would like to say on that today really is that we probably are all doing our own working out of kind of what is truly affordable. And the whole point of what I want to do today is to kind of say, just come and talk to us about it. We may not have the right answer for your particular area or your particular need, but we've done some thinking about it, and we understand, and where we did our research and where we got that research from might be really useful for you. And I think another strength of our movement is that we're generous with this knowledge. You know, we will talk to you and bounce off ideas with each other. But I should also say, in terms of the 6 tenants at Rock House, they've all had their own particular challenge in life or housing need. But those tenants are stable now. That's the difference. So our town centre is at the threat of gentrification, so that the people with those needs wouldn't be living in the town centre if it just follows the market. And there's no place for people who struggle with it. So the major driver of people's failing homes, in the biggest insecurity for tenure in Hastings, is seasonal work. And you can imagine what the impact of COVID is now going to have as well. So and the local housing allowance just isn't enough to protect your housing benefit or universal credit equivalent. You go into debt, and you just go further and further into debt until the landlord says, well, I've had enough now, because there's no way of, so it's a permanently insecure situation, and we have very high turnover, and that's all has a negative effect in the neighbourhood. I'll just talk a little bit about our selection process. I'm not saying by any means this is perfect. It's work in progress, and it gets improved every time we do it. So we use, I guess, 5 criteria. So first of all, you have to have a demonstrable housing need. So we ask people to tell us about their housing need. They have to have a connection to Hastings. It's probably similar to a local authority's investigations on that side of it. We take people at their face value. It's usually fairly convincing with their straightforward to tally with their description of their housing need. We then we do ask some questions about people's ability to pay and to understand that, which isn't to say that we will exclude people if they've got challenges. It's just forewarned is forearmed, really. And then the other 2 criteria that we look for are a commitment to co-housing and an enthusiasm to contribute. And how do you assess those? Well, what we done in the past when we've shortlisted for our tenancies is we've brought people together and said, look, you're here, and we do basically group interviews, and we make it clear at the start that you're here because we recognised your housing need. You're not competing with each other on housing need now, but what we want to assess with you is what's your understanding of co-housing and what contributions. And we do it through, I think we try to make that as an enjoyable an experience as possible. I don't think we've got that completely right. So I think some people are completely find the whole situation a bit unnerving, but we are quite friendly people, and we do manage to kind of settle a few people down who are a bit more nervous about that. But it's I think we've made quite good decisions on that side of things and had some quite healthy debates about how we've assessed that side of things. But as I said, I don't think we're perfect about it, and I think we've also learned that whatever mechanism you use to select people, at the end of the day, people are desperate to find somewhere to live that's affordable, and people may say, I have all these, this is what I could contribute, and then life gets in the way. So even if the good intentions are there, then whether people live up to those contributions, it's not 100% that they do, and there are reasons for that. So we have to ask the question, what would enable people to do that? So it is all work in progress on that side of things. We did have one flat that we adapt. So we used, for the first time, Hastings Borough Council used their grant, their disability facilities grants, to adapt a property before someone moved in. And we did want to make sure that that went to somebody who did have that need and build to that need. So we worked quite well with, it was an interesting relationship with the council. To begin with, it was in the wrong place, but we worked through it, and we got a really good result on that in terms of finding somebody who was in true need on that side of things. Originally, they were sending us people that were in secure tenancies, and we said, why would you do that? Just because it's not adapted. It's kind of, that's not the right clientele to be sending to us.